Hi all, today we talk about transhumating livestock in the late Middle Ages. Now this is a topic that, a few people actually talk about around, and instead it was part of, of a substantial part of medieval economy, especially in the late Middle Ages and in certain regions of the continent. Here we've got a nice map that shows into Central and Southern Europe the main transhumance routes and areas of pastures. And today we're gonna essentially discuss two of these areas in Southern Europe that are Central and Southern Italy. Here you see in the map these stripes that um, around the Abruzzi, and the Iberian and especially the Castilian ones that here you find at the center of the Iberian Peninsula. But let's give a bit of context before that. First of all, why did this livestock farming took place mostly and developed greatly during the late Middle Ages? Well, there was, as always, we recently talked about quite extensively about Black Death, and now it affected the European economy. Now, one of the consequences of the plague of the mid-14th century that comes again cyclically, even if in more reduced extension in the European continent, had was the general loss within Europe of the of the arable lands. Because obviously, large parts of rural communities had been wiped out by the plague, and many, and not simply, just the fact that the peasants had died because of the plague, but all of the problem, the economical collapse of European economy had brought to the desertion of many formerly arable lands that basically became uninhabited, and and that in turn brought to the the increasement of the lands destined to pastures, to grazing. This was a broad phenomenon in the sense that many lands actually with the Black Death get completely, abandoned. We have even an increase of the forested areas during this time because nature basically took back much of what the low medieval societies during the 12th and 13th century had managed to bonify and to turn to arable land. So, as you understand, pastoralism was in the immediate, in the centuries immediately following the Black Death. So, with this great lack of sudden lack of population in the European continent, basically was the first and most and easiest response that you could give in certain cases to a new working land organization. So livestock increases in Europe, and this is the general picture we have to bear in mind. And to benefit of this situation, especially weren't more than the local livestock was in fact the transhumating one, because this is also part of the bigger picture, because if you have wider areas of land, or even a certain at a regional scale, a lower density of populations, many areas that got uninhabited, you can think of also of of spacing with your cattle, with your herd, into in trying to, according to the season, because this was mostly a seasonal phenomenon, to go into lands that were relatively far away from each other, geographically speaking, and that were more, apt to your livestock farming. And so that there was no reason at that point to say, I've got a herd, I've got cattle, I I just remain the way I am, the place I am, because obviously you have to think there was also huge competition between lords, between communities. We will be seeing this in detail today. Um, in the sense that obviously, all the land that got had been made desert by the plague was obviously cheap to occupy. You have to think obviously the most resourceful landowners like lords to have broader means to occupy a certain part of land. So there were also communities that maybe were sedentary in one place that had some local livestock, and however had suffered of the plague at the point that even their business had shrunk, and yet they had rights over those lands that certain lords try at a certain point to acquire in part by occupying parts of lands that formerly belonged to that community, and that this community, of which these communities obviously suffered. And it was for this reason that the European governments began to get interested into the matter. Also because it was, not in fact not just because of the revenues that could be obtained through taxes on these rise in business and livestock farming, but also because of strictly political and territorial reasons that implied the relation between the communities that the governments could regulate at this point. Now, as I said, we're going to talk mostly about Italy and about Spain. So Italy, the local governments, at the increase of livestock farming, took the chance to reaffirm their own public monopoly over the the pastures, especially against the abuses of the lords and also of communities that obviously also, if they, if they had the chance, would take advantage of it. And this happened in several places, especially those areas that obviously already had some form of developed livestock farming. This happened in Siena, in southern Tuscany. It happened in the Papal States, probably as early as the pontificate of Martin V in the first in the decade, the first and second decade of the 15th century, and also in the kingdom of Naples. That is technically the one of Sicily, but at this point it's still divided between the Aragonese and in Sicily and the Angevins in Naples. But the Angevins are pretty much in crisis. So at a certain point, the Aragonese conquered even the Neapolitan lands in peninsular Italy. And what these governments did was to install and to institute and special customs that were essentially offices deputed to essentially the control of livestock, to whom was entrusted, in fact, the duty of promoting and organize the migration of the herds that from that during the autumn went down the Apennines, towards the coastal plains. And during the spring, they would instead take the opposite way by returning um, over the high pastures on the mountains. And among these, the other duties was obviously the one of cash in the sense that the shepherds had always were passing over lands that normally didn't belong to them. And we're talking about a sort of very poor economy here. So what would happen is that shepherds were passing over lands that maybe were of other people, and therefore they had to pay certain for using a certain land. For instance, one of the rights was one of the herbaticum, the one of for grazing grass, and also the public protection that was granted to them. In a sense, the shepherds and their activity was protected by the public authorities, and and this particular protection was called fida in Italian. I think um, the etymology should be the one of fidelity or something like that. Um, so something essentially these guys could trust towards um, the towards the public authority. And we have to think also about the geography here, because why do we talk about Italy and Spain? It's essentially because these areas, especially central and southern Italy and the center of the Iberian Peninsula were obviously the places that saw the greater development in Europe of transhumant livestock farming. And in Italy, there is a plateau in southern Italy called the Tavoliere, which basically means it's like a table. That's what the name comes from. Which is it extends itself in Apulia, so the southeastern the heel of the boat of the Italian peninsula, even though it's mostly not really the small peninsula you see at the bottom. But this happened also in the Sienese Maremma, which is a region of southern Tuscany, the one we were talking about before, which also encompass part of northwestern Lazio, that is the region of Rome. And in fact, always in the papal states, livestock transhumant livestock farming was present also in the Roman so-called campagna, which means countryside. That is the name that eventually, and a certain region made its own. That is essentially the interland area between the mountains and the sea, but not the flatland, which is quite marshy. But also in that place, that instead is called Marittima, essentially takes name from the sea, in the south part of Lazio. Between the 14th and 15th century, you see a huge increase, especially of sheep, and secondarily of bovines, which begin to populate this country and start to make up their herds become to be part of of a broad circuit of livestock farming that encompassed also other lands. The majority, however, of the of transhumant livestock farming took place into the kingdom of Naples. Alphonsus the Magnanimous was king of Naples, having conquered the kingdom from the Angevins in the 40s of the 15th century. Um, Reorganized the so-called Dohana Mene Pecudum, which should mean, the customs of, I don't know if it's the, however, of the herds. And this had already been developed during Angevin times, in fact. And there are political reasons why this happened, because when Alphonsus conquered Naples, the Aragonese, first of all, the Angevins had, the Angevin monarchy there had undergone, in the previous centuries, a sharp decline. And who had mostly favored of this decline had been the Neapolitan barons, that is, the nobility of southern peninsular Italy, which obviously had always been a force which had fought against the centralization um, carried out by, at least the attempts of centralizations carried out by the Angevin monarchy, and obviously took every good chance to expand their own personal, you know, wealth and power, and we were definitely enemies of the crown in this sense. Not openly, not all the times. At least there were major revolts, telling the truth, also, but it wasn't a perennial state. It's just that the political tension obviously pushed towards that direction. Um, so during the the Aragonese conquest and all the problems that followed, and therefore the arrival of a new dynasty and all the problems related to reorganizing the kingdom after the war and all the problems, the Neapolitan barons had substantially extended their own rights and powers, some of which were eventually even recognized by the same Aragonese in order to keep them calm. One of the major problems of the monarchy, probably the greater one, like in old times, was the problem we're getting money from and how to rule a kingdom um, by drawing money from there. So obviously the barons had acquired a huge, power also in the countryside. They were landowners. So most of the agricultural production of the kingdom at that point was in their hands, and there was no way that the kings could take it back, at least at that moment. And cities were also kind of weak in a certain sense. So when transhumance livestock farming began to develop powerfully also in southern Italy, where the plague had struck like in the other regions of Europe, um, the new monarchs take the chance. This had been already done by the Angevins, as we have seen, but the Aragonese backed it, support and reorganized it. Um, Begin to look at this form of livestock to take money from, because it was such a big business at this point, and the Apulian pastures could host 20 years later the Aragonese conquest, 600,000 um, animals, and the, the majority of and think even about the numbers here: 600,000 between sheep and and cows. So 600,000 heads. It's a freaking lot of production, considering the material wealth of that time. And this dohana was so this custom was so well protected by the crown that the number of heads increased in the following decades up to reach in 1536, so we are already in the early modern age, the number of exceeding the number of 1 million. So think about, the crop rates, for instance, of those times. That's a pretty huge expansion. It's a very steady growth. And obviously also it made up a huge income, because in 1496 the imposition of the protection over the shepherds granted to the Neapolitan finances over um, over 100,000 um, 100,000 ducats. So I'm just reflecting about numbers here. This is a very big thing, and it's interesting because in this sense also the shepherds probably didn't give that much. I mean, it was always a sort of, costs and benefit to the whole thing, because here you see, the kings extended their own protection over the herdsmen, but it's not that they want really that much, because the protection means that that the shepherds have to pay for it. So it's a kind of an imposition, but at the same time, these shepherds made in turn their own money through we've saw how their cattle grew in numbers, so they even benefit from it and felt more protected from the ingerences of the barons that instead tended to expand in turn their own livestock, their own agriculture into those lands that were maybe already used by the herdsmen. So this was not just an economical thing, but also a very political one. So, telling the truth, the transhumance is something that encompassed many other lands of Italy. This happened at the foot of the Alps and within the Alps, so in the pre-Alpine areas and as well as the Alpine areas. In the marshes, that is the hilly region on the Adriatic Sea in the center of Italy, the Abruzzo that we mentioned before, that is still today, it was at the time, it was still today the major, pastoral area of Italy in many ways. In fact, in the map you can clearly see how here the transhumance routes actually cross here from Abruzzo and into Apulia, and these routes are still present today in part, and this happens all over Europe. Transhumance has a huge tradition in European society. It's something extremely old, if anything, because the pastures in the mountains have always been more or less there in the same places. The mountains, obviously, the pastures maybe not much, because that could depend also on the trail, on the roads, the ways of communications, and the general economy. But let's say that since very ancient in time, from the Iron Age, these places saw the presence of transhumance. So it's very fascinating, and it's still something going on. So you can even document yourself about it. I'm not particularly interested in the topic, but I recognize it's fascinating. Other areas of Italy that saw transhumance were Sardinia, that has this, and Sicily too, but especially Sardinia, and you can think of this inner plateau in which the livestock stays, and in the in the warmer season into the hinterland, and mountainous area, and then in the colder um, time of the year, these cattle and herds go towards the coasts. It's always basically the same thing, and we have to think that it wasn't just animals migrating, but also entire communities, because it's not just a few. You don't have to imagine the few shepherds will lead the the herds, and then nothing else. The whole herdsman communities followed in great part, and this has really nothing to do just with transhumance or livestock even. Seasonal migrations, especially in certain areas like southern Italy, had always been there. This is a moment in which there is a kind of specialization of into certain for instance for gathering, or plugging, and therefore there is a working force that maybe lives in another place, but in that period of the year it comes to work on that land. And think especially that southern Italy was extremely wealthy and still is for the production of fruit, of vegetables and stuff like that. So it always saw this kind of mobility between the southern within the southern Italian regions that were about, in fact, transhumance, but also simple livestock and agricultural works. And it really made up a big thing of the economy, and it shows the presence of an interconnected system of production that at that time made the kingdom of Naples actually quite wealthy for the standards of the time. In terms of economical wealth and population, was a pretty big entity. Because we are at a moment in which, indeed, technology was what it was. So the you know the fertility of land still meant much in terms of the of a kingdom's income. Um, and these forms of organization, of working organization, really tells in this sense also how profitable it was to do something like that. What happened in southern Italy at this time, also in terms of transhumance, was probably much more developed than you find here in Switzerland or in the Pyrenees, but not because it was harder work necessarily, but simply because the resources allowed it, the spaces allowed it, the ways of communications were played a huge part. There is a European market that is forming. Certain goods are requested more than others, so you find many forms of transhumance all over Europe, but also consistent differences in size and qualities about within the same. So, and we have to think that at these these seasonal migrations, kind of were extended also in various forms. Within the same Italy, you find that basically great part of the Italian territory has some form of transhumance. So whether it's small or larger, it doesn't matter, but it's still a very consistent part of the economy. And Other Mediterranean regions, however, knew at the same time a strong development of transhumant livestock farming. In particular, there was a very solid organization starting from the 13th century in the Castilian Pastoralism. Um, you know, this date doesn't have to seem, strange, because we have to think about the time, the places, and the times, because to organize these transhumant routes that led the herdsmen and the herds from the pastures of the North Meseta to the one located in south of Spain, or beyond the Central Cordillera, or even through transversal roads from the contradas of the east of the Extremadura, was the Mesta. The Mesta was the very powerful organization that reunited under the protection of the Castilian king all the breeders of Castile, which implied basically all the landowners. And Spain in this moment is in a peculiar situation, and these owners are sometimes military orders, for instance, or other monks of normal monasteries that had some form of livestock, and simple peasants or other landowners of more modest condition. There are several reasons why this area, of Central Iberia begins to expand so much in Transhumance. Well, first of all, there are kind of two reasons that I think are worth to mention. The first one is the Reconquista and the stage in which the Reconquista had arrived in the 13th century. Now you know that with the Battle of the Las Navas of Tolosa, the Christian Spanish kingdoms managed to defeat in the mid of the 13th century the Moors, and to take a very big part of their central and southern Iberian lands. Now, the problem though was that the Reconquista had really marked and structured the landscape for centuries, because that area of that central band of the Iberian Peninsula had usually been a frontier area, which meant there was a lot of warfare going on in there, and those weren't really great places to settle with a sedentary economy. So there weren't many arable lands, but rather these areas were used for livestock, especially in certain periods of the year that not just for climatic reasons, but also for the rhythm of warfare, of seasonal warfare at that time. And of the same economy corresponded to, we could allow a particular form of transhumance. So this is something that, livestock was developed there since an early age, so that, the herdsmen would take their herds in these places. Then when things got wrong, they could at least move and go somewhere else. And this central area, the Iberian Plateau, was already characterized by pastoralism at this age. And when the Christians achieved this major victory at Las Navas, what happens is that all of a sudden they get a huge amount of land that is incidentally part also of this area. So the most immediate thing that it could do, especially as landowners, Castilia was a largely feudal state at the time. So the first thing is, let's send herdsmen there. Let's go send our cattle and herds there, and let's expand them. And basically, the creation of the Mesta came under this. Came to happen through this moment of great expansion of the pastoral lands in the hands of the Iberian Christians, or the Christian Iberians, better. But it was also another important factor that influenced the Iberian Peninsula in many ways, but it was the 100 Years' War. Now, the 100 Years' War was renownedly fought between England and France. Now, England was since a very early time a great exporter of raw wool. Were a lot of sheep herds, The main problem is that when the Hundred Years' War broke out, um, the English wool stops being exported to France because obviously we're at war, so um, they would have lost it, and also towards the Flanders that kind of fit in the situation, and therefore the other great producer of wool, especially quantitatively speaking, because was indeed Castile. And it's interesting here, and I'm stressing the adverb quantitatively because we must say that the Castilian wool was actually worse than the English one. But at the same time, it was the only one left. This is kind of market rule of demand and offer. Yeah, English wool could have been better, but here the problem is that there is no wool at all because the English do not export it anymore. At least they don't have the same means as before to exporting it now to the French markets, etc. So this kind of favors increasingly the production of Castilian wool. So in addition to revenues coming from normal livestock, the Castilian landowners begin um, to produce wool from their ships, also for a broader market than just the local Iberian one or wherever they already exported it, and to expand this business increasingly. So the Mesta was an extremely powerful entity, even within the it was very importantly protected also in here, as it had happened in Aragonese Naples by the Castilian kings, because it was an extremely remunerative activity from which the kingdom could draw considerable resources. And it's been calculated that in the 15th century, the herds of the owned by the Mesta came to reunite something like between 2.5 million or 3 or even 3 million ships, which were destined to even increase even more in the following century. So you understand how huge we're talking about. Heads, 3 million heads that will even increase later. It's a huge quantity of animals. It's a huge business built around it. And it tells you also how this was really entering into a broader circle of European economy in many ways. Here we are at the dawn of the modern age, and the wool production was something already still incredibly important for the European economy of the time. It was something relatively, controllable, because especially in the Aragonese case in Naples, you can understand how that was done quite cunningly to stem the influence of local barons. And the extension of the protection over, like we've seen with the FIDA, but also like in the Castilian case, was an incredibly important and clever mean to keep large parts of landowners and consequently through the clienteling system of the population and of the political body of the kingdom into your own hands. And obviously this also created problems because these people were kind of like mobsters in many ways. They made money and they weren't much happy of paying for they wished that there had been probably no kingdom and to establish one on their own instead, through their transhumant livestock farming. But it was still, it's all a matter of balance here, and I think it brilliantly depicts the reality of the Ancien Regime and all these balancement of the various powers that operate within a kingdom. So, I don't know if you like this video. I don't care much about these topics. I've always found medieval, not medieval, I said medieval like a lapsus, but history economics sometimes bothering, annoying, but it really makes you understand so much. I always say that in the videos, because you can care about wars and warriors and leaders and stuff, but really what made it all work was what was at the base. And these topics, as of relative interest for probably for a supposedly entertainmental channel, can seem boring. I think at the same time tend to can make people reflect in many ways, and how even the quantities shock here. I personally didn't know that there were up to 1 million cattle heads in southern Italy, and up to more than 3 million cattle heads in Castile at the end of the late Middle Ages. It's a huge number. Sometimes in certain places it was there weren't even enough, not as many as people as those. So you can imagine how much wealth they brought in, and how quite developed these organizations really were. For the Aragonese, having the customs on central and southern Italian Transhumance was a huge income. It helped a lot to finance all their wars, all their policies all over Italy, so in the Mediterranean. So and in the Castilian case, like the Mesta was like pillar of their of Castilian economy, and it was even a force to be reckoned with. So all things you have necessarily to take into consideration if you are more interested about politics or military affairs, because this is the way everything was really financed. And another thing that I like very much, especially considering the economy of the late Middle Ages, is how the development of monarchical of national monarchies, and therefore the general subdivision of the European lands into big entities of land, actually implied that diplomatical relationships and also obviously wars, etc., were of huge importance in sometimes shifting certain trade routes, and influencing the general economy. This is a moment in which kind of European market is being formed towards the end of the Middle Ages, but already during the 100 Years' War, the English wool exports into France were practically blocked. So that is quite a big thing, and as a result, this meant that the Castilians became to make money because of that. Because incidentally, there was no wool in the market. They were already substantial producers of that. It didn't matter that their wool was of lesser quality compared to the English one. Yeah, they kind of got the place. And think of how that influenced the whole picture, and how the economy of states that are relatively far within the European continent was actually had very direct and substantial consequences in economy, and consequently in society and politics, etc. So I stop here for now. Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I hope I was enough clear, so I thank you for watching. As always, if you like this video, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel to receive further contents. And I thank you once again very much for listening to me, and I wish you a beautiful time. and see you next time. Bye.